We're going to have a little bit of fun tonight. I'm going to set up a series of slides for you, and we're going to look at where Immunocal came from and the history behind our research and development of this product. So if you just bear with me for a second, I'll get this going. So where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. We have been around for over 40 years. And we have produced volumes and volumes of research articles and publications, and as well collected probably over 80 different worldwide patents on our product, Immunocal. But where did this all come from? Well, here's a nice picture of one of my lifetime heroes, Dr. Gustavo Bunos, and he's that kid standing there staring out into space, wearing a nice pair of shorts and patent leather shoes. I guess that was in vogue. This is just before the war in Europe. He's originally from Italy, and these are his parents. Here's him a little bit later on, and at this point in time, I believe the war was on. This is still in Italy, and you could see Dr. Bunos standing there. Everybody's actually very well dressed. You got to give the Italians kudos for their style, but he's looking very much like Elvis Presley. Look at that haircut, and this is before Presley came out, so he was ahead of his time, clearly. Very good-looking young man, and still hiding the fact that in that head of his rested a true genius. This is a picture of what most people remember Dr. Bunos looking like. It took about 2 hours to clean him up for this picture. Generally, his hair is all over the place, looking very Einsteinian. And he has a smile on his face, which, again, is unusual. He's a self-professed cranky old man. So Dr. Bunos is really the initial genius behind this product. And let's see how this all started. Now, Gustavo was a trained surgeon. Here we see him in the surgical suite way back when. You could tell that he's Italian. Look at his hand there. He's going, "Where's my scalpel?" And this was going to be his future, but because of the war, he decided that he was going to do what so many other people have done, and that is move to America and find your fame and fortune. America seemed like the land of milk and honey, and so he picked up and immigrated to the United States. And he landed in Indianapolis at a rather prestigious institution. But when he got there, he found out that the Americans had a certain chauvinistic view of the practice of medicine, and people who did not have their degree from the United States generally could not get a license to practice medicine. So Gus, being an extremely clever person, decided that he was going to go into research. And he did some really, really great work down there in Indianapolis, but one day received a letter from the government, and it read, "Dr. Bunos, we're sorry, your visa has expired. You now need to leave our country." And this was such a distressing situation. Here is a congressional record where it was brought up to the House that the United States had asked Dr. Bunos to leave, and they were mourning his loss and how terrible a thing that was, but he had no choice. He had to leave. Fortunately for me, Gustavo moved to Montreal, literally in my backyard. This is a picture of Montreal General Hospital. So the United States' loss became Canada's gain, and he threw himself right back into research. Now, remember, I mentioned that Dr. Bunos was originally a surgeon. So he was going to focus on surgical research, but with a twist. He asked a question, and I'm not sure whether anybody had asked it before, but it sounds like a simple question. Why is it that if you take the same patient, the same age, the same surgical diagnosis, the same surgery, and one of these patients will end up leaving the hospital in a week and getting back to work, but the other one would end up in the intensive care unit sometimes for months and sometimes would expire. What was at play that, given the same situation, some patients ended up doing really well and some did not? Well, you could probably ask a child and they would suggest, well, maybe it's something that these patients were eating. And Dr. Bunos felt this was a very good place to start. This is a great poster from the 1950s, looking at nutrition and proteins in particular. And there it reads, proteins, food for growth and repair. So that looked like a good idea in the 1950s and in the 1960s, but something else was at play. There was the development of a new field of medicine called immunology. Immunology wasn't even a specialty then. It was just a branch of physiology. And because Dr. Bunos was working at McGill University in Montreal, we teamed him up with a very brilliant young PhD candidate called Dr. Patricia Kongshaven. Now, Dr. Kongshaven, you see her here doing some work in the lab. Dr. Kongshaven is recognized as the great-grandmother of clinical immunology. And why would we give her a title like that? Because Patricia wrote the first chapter in the first book of clinical immunology that was broadly distributed amongst medical doctors. So she was right in there at the beginning, even before immunology was a specialty. So the two of them got to work, and they started looking at different proteins and different amino acids, knowing that it was likely going to be a protein that was going to do something to improve immune function and to save these patients from a poor outcome. And most of the poor outcomes were things like opportunistic infections or infections that came from the surgical suite. So they were collecting anything they can get their hands on and throwing it into experiments to see if anything would happen to the immune response. And of course, they were doing this in test tubes. They were doing this in animals, and they came across a few things, but nothing that you would call earth-shattering. One day, a box shows up on Dr. Bunos's desk. And it's a box from Europe. And Gustavo opens up the box, and inside the box is this fine white powder. Now, this is in the 1970s, and back in the 1970s, if you received a box in the mail with fine white powder, you tended to be a little suspicious about it. But fortunately, this box had a note on it, and the note read, "Dear Dr. Bunos, we understand that you're looking at protein biochemistry. This fine white powder is a byproduct of one of our industries here in Europe, and we don't know what to do with it. We've been dumping it in the fields, we've been dumping it in the river, and the government had asked us to stop doing this because the rivers were overgrowing and the fields were overgrowing. Well, very interesting. It also carried a check of $10,000, which I'm sure influenced Gus to put it into his experiments. And so he did. And lo and behold, a couple years later, we realized that there are groups of laboratory animals that are living, these animals are living between 30 and 50% longer. Now, this was something that drew a lot of attention. It's not that we were stretching out the lifespans of these mice, but what we were doing was imparting upon them an added defense against things that otherwise would have done them in, like certain cancers, like certain infections. And so this was really something that made you turn your head. And so the team started to get some more attention and continued on their work on this white powder, and with some very, very interesting outcomes. One day, the experiments stopped working. The placebo group and the group taking this fine white powder, they were having the same results. And Dr. Bunos went into a depression because of this, because of what looked like so promising and so exciting stopped working. And he was sitting at home alone in his apartment, recovering from hip surgery. And what do you do if you're sitting at home? You watch TV. And on comes this cooking program. And the chef in the program is complaining that for the last year or two, the cheeses coming from Europe just didn't taste the same. They just were not as tasty, as lively. And it was because in Europe, it was before the European Union, but they still had commonplace laws and regulations through the countries. The regulations were that the cheeses needed to be pasteurized at a higher temperature. And a light shone on top of Dr. Bunos's head, looked back at the protein that he was using in his experiences. It was a whey protein. And if the dairy products in Europe are being pasteurized at a higher temperature, then perhaps it was affecting the protein that he was receiving. And what he did after he recovered was immediately go find a dairy company locally that was able to produce this specific type of whey protein at a much lower temperature for pasteurization. And then the experiments started to work again. And so they were continuing, but they still did not know why this white protein, whey protein isolate, what it did, why these animals were living longer. And it was in one of these little breakout rooms, just a room just outside the laboratory facilities, sharing an awful cup of coffee, where Dr. Bunos is explaining to another doctor, Dr. Baptiste. And Dr. Baptiste said, well, I've been just reading about this newer natural protein in humans called glutathione. Maybe your product raises glutathione. And they went ahead, and it took them a little bit of time, but lo and behold, it turned out to be true. This white protein powder, later called Immunocal, was raising glutathione levels in these animals. And it was by raising the glutathione levels that these animals had a stronger resistance to major diseases and other things that would kill them early. Now here you see the original team from McGill who made this discovery. If you'll notice, all of them are smiling, except for the guy in the bottom right. They were all taking the product because of the results that they saw in the animals. The guy in the bottom right didn't like the taste. So tough for him. So now the team knew that this protein was raising glutathione. So what is glutathione? Glutathione is a naturally occurring substance that appears in every single cell of your body. And it is absolutely necessary for life itself. Let me just say another thing about glutathione. If you're going to remember any slide tonight, remember this one. You can't raise your body's glutathione levels by eating actual glutathione. If you eat glutathione, it becomes rapidly broken down in your intestines, and it never makes it from your mouth to your cells. Glutathione is made inside of your cells, and the way to raise glutathione levels in your body is to give your cells the building blocks, or what we call precursors. These are specific nutrients that your cells stitch together to make glutathione. So remember this, eating glutathione is not an efficient way to raise your body's glutathione levels. You need to eat the precursors. And that's what that white protein powder represented, the most powerful source of precursors for an organism to raise its glutathione levels. And if you haven't heard of glutathione, this will become part of your regular language in very few years. There's over 175 medical and scientific publications on it. Let me just put that into context. You all have heard of vitamin C, and you all have heard of vitamin D. If you look at all the medical and scientific publications on vitamin C and vitamin D, they're only about half of what there exists on glutathione. So although the medical field knows about glutathione, well, this is going to just filter through, and if you haven't already heard about glutathione, you will very soon. So now we know that this progenitor to Immunocal raises glutathione. So the next step is, let's look at human diseases that seem to be deficient in glutathione. And doing that, we were able to do our first human study. You see, in the 1980s, when AIDS was raising its ugly head, if you got AIDS, it was essentially the kiss of death. Fortunately, these days, we have excellent medications that can keep HIV, AIDS patients alive for indefinitely. But back then, it was really bad news. So we read some articles, for example, coming out of California, where HIV positive or AIDS patients were, by definition, glutathione deficient. And we immediately jumped on that and submitted proposals to do human studies on AIDS. Now, you can't just decide to do a human study. You've got to jump through all kinds of hoops, through regulatory processes, through boards of ethics, through the government. You can't just do a human study. It's a lot of work to be able to do that. And at the time, because AIDS carried such a poor prognosis, the Board of Ethics looked at our proposal and said, okay, these people are going to die anyways, so go ahead and play with your protein powder. And it's a great thing that they did that, because what we showed with our initial studies was just profound. We were able to take patients who weighed 80 and 90 pounds and get them back to work. We were able to decrease viral loads, sometimes to zero. We were able to increase what we call CD4 lymphocyte counts, which is the white blood cell that went bad in AIDS. And now we put ourselves on the map, because everybody wanted to join in. We got funding from the Canadian government through what's called the HIV Trials Network. Other members at McGill joined in. People from across the world noticed our studies and started writing on it. The picture of the gentleman in your lower left, that's Dr. Luc Montagnier, who won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of the AIDS virus. In that book, you see, Oxidative Stress and Cancer and AIDS, he published that book, and there was a complete chapter, not on glutathione, but on Immunocal, the product name that we used eventually for that white protein powder. So we were now on the map. And subsequent to that, we continued publishing on HIV/AIDS. We did work on hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. We did work in cardiology. We did work on lung disease. And the papers just kept on coming. Just enormous amount of research published by this small company using a natural product to raise a natural substance in the human body. And of course, subsequently, we filed for many international patents, and our team grew. This is Dr. Wolf Droge, formerly the head of immunology at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. He got wind of what we were doing. He picked up and left and moved to Montreal to work with our team. He eventually developed Immunocal Platinum, which is the second type of Immunocal we had. And we'll talk about that another day. So we had a very, very strong team that not only kept on doing the research, but commercialized the product so that everybody can have it. And everybody can have it without a prescription. Eventually, through Health Canada, by submitting our research, we were able to make medical claims about the product. We were able to make a medical claim about the immune system. You take Immunocal, it's going to support and strengthen your immune system. And this is very, very unusual for a natural product to be able to say something like that. In fact, I think that we're still the only natural protein that can make that claim. We went from studying people with health challenges to looking at very healthy people. Here's a study way back in 1999 where we took groups of university athletes, split them either into a placebo group or an Immunocal group, put them through identical training for an entire summer, brought them back at the end of the summer and demonstrated between a 10 and 15% increase in muscle strength and endurance. This was absolutely wild, considering when you look at the Olympics, the difference between the person coming in first place, the gold medal, and the person coming in sixth place is often less than 1%. And we were showing 10 to 15% improvement. And we went on and did that in the geriatrics population too. A 10% increase in a geriatric patient is profound. It's the difference between being in bed or being in a wheelchair, between being in a wheelchair and using a walker, between using a walker and using a cane. These are huge differences. So the research kept on expanding, the company kept on expanding, and with our added findings in muscular performance, we got another claim that we could make by taking Immunocal. You can increase your muscle strength, do better on the field, and so it's spread like wildfire amongst the sporting world. This was our first major Olympics, 2012. This is the Canadian rowing team. They're showing off their medals proudly, but what was most interesting was this was the oldest rowing team at the Olympics, having won their medals and taking the Immunocal. And nowadays, Doug and I, during the next Olympics, we can be watching it on the TV and point and look at any number of teams: Canadian Olympic team, American Olympic team, Polish Olympic team, British Olympic team, and on and point and say, he's on Immunocal, she's on Immunocal. And so, we're well established in the world of sports, but even more importantly, in the world of conventional medicine. This is a book that I published a number of years ago, and what it is just a collection of articles published in the scientific and medical literature on Immunocal. And there are over 85 studies. I challenge anybody to show me a natural product that has that many studies accredited to their research. And we don't pay for these studies anymore. Now, I sit comfortably in an office and I get research proposals from around the world from scientists that they just want to continue this research and show all the things and all the benefits that glutathione has on the human organism. And we're going to be covering a lot more of this in future programs. I know that once you start looking at what we're doing, you're going to have a whole bunch of questions, some of which we'll answer tonight, but just to let you know, most of the questions about glutathione, you'll find the answers in this book. This is my 5th edition, and you see some links there where you might be able to find this book, but also I'm always updating research articles. I'm always talking about new things in the world of glutathione. So if you're into it, please avail yourself to these websites. And thank you for your attention.